Hi, everyone. Welcome back from Thanksgiving break. Hopefully, you had a ton of venison and oysters and shellfish in order to acknowledge the meals of the actual first Thanksgiving. Today, we're going to go through the French and Indian War very, very quickly. It's just taking you through the North American theater of the Seven Years' War. So to start off with, we have to talk about relations between the Native Americans and the Europeans. We see here a painting of the William Penn Treaty. Um, this is modern day Delaware, but then it was part of the Pennsylvania colony. And you have to remember that Penn is a Quaker, and so he's about peace and tolerance to a degree, and equality. And so we have some strong relations with the Native Americans in this region to kind of start off with. Here's just another version of that, a little bit more simplified in terms of artistic style, but it's the same idea. And these relations are going to change from these European powers throughout the course of the French and Indian War. Remember that this is just one theater of the Seven Years' War, and so we don't want to get bogged down in the details. I'm going to actually skip around uh, for some of these details. I'm not going to hit everything that's in this particular PowerPoint, but I'm going to give you the broad overall view of what happens in the French and Indian War, some big battles, some big moments, and we want to consider how is this influencing the non-native, how are the non-native peoples in North America influencing the Native Americans, as well as how are these European powers interacting together, and what is this going to do for the balance of power of Europe? Recall that this is the main driving force behind many of the wars that occur after the Treaty of Westphalia, the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, ending the 30 Years' War, the kind of last pseudo-war over religion. So first thing for the French and Indian War, note the dates. We're going to go back a little bit. It's not going to be exactly 7 years that we're going to cover here. French and Indian War. So who fought? Britain, the American colonies, which are British, and the Iroquois nation. Now, the Iroquois Confederacy is not one group of people. It's not the United States of America. Think of it more as America under the Articles of Confederation. No real central government to speak of. You have these 9 different tribes who, while sharing common culture, language to a degree, etc., they don't always agree on voting matters. And so they can sometimes go against each other. But for the purposes of this, this is the only group that even has any relationship with the British during this time period. And they are fighting against the French, obviously, and all the other North American tribes. Those are going to be the ones fighting on the side of the French. And this goes back to, and I'll get more into this in a little bit, how they view both the British and the French, how they view North America. Britain views it as a place to plunder, whereas the French view it as a trading partner. We can see just a quick little map here. You see a nice little insert. Lake Erie, it's the Ohio country. It's out west. It's west past really central Pennsylvania and beyond. Longstanding differences, obviously, between the British and the French. 2 different wars, as we see here. That's obviously going to influence things. And this is just another in that long line of conflicts in terms of the second one. But we know that this is not just about North America. This is worldwide. So it's a battle for territory, but it's territory with a purpose. We can see the different lands owned by each of these colonial powers during this time period. The British really only have the 13 colonies right there along the eastern seaboard. Differences in North America. This is what I was mentioning earlier. The British believe that the way to win, quote unquote, win at mercantilism is to control as much as you can. That means to them colonizing these different areas. The French, however, believe that the way that you win is by establishing trading partners with as many different places as possible. We might even call these places spheres of influence, where they have primary trading rights with these different groups. And that's the way the French set up their section of North America. Those differences lead to differences with how the native populations are going to view their relationships with these groups. For the British came in and conquered them, so obviously there are going to be long-standing hostilities there. Whereas for the French, you tended to see a more kind of cooperative relationship between them in terms of trying to make money for both of them. So as I mentioned, that kind of takes care of that question. Moving on, causes of war. Now, I'm going to blast through these. Some of these, kind of whatever. Expansion of trade, obviously, again, this is all falling under the umbrella of mercantilism. Control as much as you can, own the wealth, beat the other countries, win the game. competing claims for the Ohio River Valley, so over the specific territory, again, British trying to expand their territory in North America, ignoring the native claims to the land, because that's basically the history of the world in a nutshell when we're talking about European history, and fear of Catholicism on the British part, and then fear of anti-Catholicism from the French part. So we have Britain kind of surrounded by traditionally Catholic powers, and even though this isn't a war over religion, religion still plays a role in terms of the national identities of these people. People are still going to believe that, yes, I am French, but part of being French is also my being Catholic. That's not the case for everybody, but that is still a driving force behind this conflict. This is going to center around the forks of the Ohio River. Many of you guys are probably familiar with this already. This is where Point State Park is located, and this is the main waterway to get from the East Coast, the eastern area that had been settled, to the Mississippi River. So this is an incredibly important juncture in American geography. And it starts a little bit earlier, 1747, we have Cellars Expedition. The goal of the French in this case is to demand allegiance from local Native Americans to try and limit British expansion into these territories. And to do so, they actually buried 6 engraved plates, and we'll see one of them in just a second. We still have those 6 of them. But you can see again, here's the Ohio River, here's where it connects to the Mississippi, and here is Fort Duquesne, aka Fort Pitt. And that's really where this conflict is going to center around. We have this meeting at Logstown, and you don't necessarily need to get into the weeds and all of this, but here we have dedicated to Louis XV here in France. This is one of those plates or placards. Logstown, located right here. If you've ever been to Ambridge, it's not far away from Ambridge. You can see some other places, Meadowcroft Rock Shelter if you've been there. And here we're in the Allegheny Valley at this point. Here's an image. We have a nice dog in there, so you know that's good. Jesuit missionary is meeting with different Shawnee warriors at Logstown in order to try and gain their allegiance. So this is one of the reasons why the French already kind of have a foothold in the region. Then we start to see some bloodshed, and it's all thanks to this dude here. And he should look pretty familiar to you because, oh hey, that's George Washington. Washington and the Virginia militia is sent to Jumonville Glen to try and make some inroads with these Native American groups in an effort to hopefully expand British territory all the way out to the forks of the Ohio. They are met, and he unwittingly helps to create the war. What happens is these French envoys who are there with Native Americans are walking through the woods. Washington's men see them. They open fire. As to whether who fired the first shot, there's some debate over that, but Washington is geared for a fight, clearly, based on his diary entries. And the Washington's men are able to carry the day. It's a very small skirmish, and this is going to lead to war because during this time period, war is still very gentlemanly, and they're fighting in the woods here. It's a little bit of a different feel to it. The envoy Juman is captured, and as he is captured, one of the Native American chieftains who is meeting with Washington, he's known as the Half King. He clubs Juman over the head and kills him. And because he is under George Washington's care, that means it is George Washington's fault that he is dead. The French respond in kind. They are going to attack Washington. He knows this. Washington sets up FortNecessity out of, necessity. It's basically just a pile of sticks. If you've ever been there, it's not super exciting. It's nothing to write home about, but it does play a very pivotal role because Washington and his men are surrounded. It's raining on them. They can't even get their weapons to fire. Washington can't see any more of his men die, and so he decides he's losing with British-style tactics at this point, and this is going to influence him moving forward. He signs the Declaration of Surrender. The problem is it's in French. George Washington can't read French, and as a result, it's either that or a mistranslation. So historians kind of disagree on that. He signs it, and he basically claims, okay, by signing this, it is completely my fault. And this is what really kicks off this part of the 7 Years' War. Until FortNecessity, he writes at Jumonville Glen that he finds the sound of bullets whizzing by charming. That all changes when he starts to see some of his own men die. It's at this point we have the Albany Conference. Thanks, Ben Franklin, for that awesome cartoon. And this is really the first time that the colonies even consider trying to work together as one, as opposed to just simply following British rule. It's not that they're going against Britain. Please don't misunderstand. But it's that George Washington, or excuse me, Ben Franklin is advocating that, hey, we need to get our act together. As a result of that bloodshed in Western PA at Jumonville Glen at FortNecessity, we have General Edward Braddock. He steps up, and Washington looks up to him like a father figure. He models his entire leadership style, strict, drill, regimented, after him. Braddock makes some errors, and I'll show you that on the map. It'll be a little bit easier to see. Washington will emerge as a reluctant hero, and that'll be kind of it for him in terms of his deal throughout the war from here. Battle of the Monongahela. We see the French troops over here, British troops here. The British troops carve out like a 50-foot wide or 100-foot wide pathway through dense, deep forest. So the French obviously know that they're coming. He sends a group called the Flying Column up ahead in an effort to engage the French. This column is defeated and pushed back. Unfortunately, the train of people behind him is so long they are basically trapped and massacred. Against Washington's wishes, they're going to fight this in the traditional British style, whereas the French and Indians are going to use guerrilla-style tactics. And as I mentioned, that really influences George Washington moving forward. This area here today is known as Braddock. It's right along the Monongahela River. And as you see, this is its location today, almost perfectly. And if you look right across the river, oh, there's Kennywood right there. So next time you're on the skyrocket, a little salute to where Braddock laid dead. This is Benjamin West's portrait of the death of Edward Braddock. Here's Washington standing over him. And the movement of the body of Braddock is kind of interesting. They didn't want him to be desecrated. They didn't want the grave disturbed, and so he's eventually taken out and reinterred. Here's where he was originally buried along the trail, and here's where he's buried today at FortNecessity. This is just kind of showing you the basic attack and the way in which the British want to go with things. William Johnson, he gets the nickname Chief Big Business by the Native American tribes that he has befriended in the area, which is just an absolutely awesome nickname. And Chief Hendrick, Temsquatawa is his actual name, but he's named Chief Hendrick according to the English. He leads an attack. They're making their way up through Lake Champlain, up through New York, in an effort to try and attack Canada. Basically, Johnson is able to hold off the main French force, builds Fort William Henry to try and preserve control over the area. It's not going to last. The French had already kind of been removed from Nova Scotia anyway, but this is the full end of that French influence in the region. They're given the boot, and many of them make their way down to Louisiana. So even though it's under French control, it's actually the Acadian people, who influence the Cajun culture in Louisiana today. The Battle of Fort William Henry, the French surround Lake George and the fort itself, Fort William Henry. Lieutenant Colonel Monroe, the British, refuses to surrender. There's heavy fighting, heavy loss, especially on the British side. No reinforcements are going to be sent by the British, and Marquis de Montcalm finds this out and eventually talks his way in. Afterwards, the British surrender. Some of them are killed as they are being led away by the Native Americans. These Native Americans, traditionally, according to their culture, would have been allowed to keep the spoils of war. But because it's the French who are kind of guiding this, that doesn't happen. That offends the Native Americans. They're not asked to sit down to the post-fight meal with the French and the British. And as a result, they kind of take out their anger on these colonists who are leaving. This really kind of riles up the colonists in general. This is one of the scenes in Last of the Mohicans, the image there that you see at the bottom of the movie itself. And so we're starting to see the colonists not just rely on the regulars, kind of feel some pain in this as well. Here's just the location of Fort William Henry, and you'll see this is Lake George, and then this connects to Lake Champlain, and then further north to the St. Lawrence River, where the stronghold, the capital of French Canada, Montreal, is located. So it plays a very, very important role for the British to be able to make their way there. Just a quick note, we have Ticonderoga right here, and of where Lake George connects to Lake Champlain. That'll obviously be very important. They make the best pencils, as you guys will know. Cadillac of pencils, Ticonderogas. And that's also going to play a big role with Benedict Arnold in the American Revolution. I'll pause the lesson here